Welcome back. I'm Sage, and this is Easy English with Sage.
Let me ask you something before we begin. And I want you to think about this carefully because it matters. You've studied English. You've practiced. You've watched videos, read grammar books, maybe even passed advanced exams. And yet, there are moments. Moments in a meeting when someone asks you a question and your mind goes quiet. Moments when you know exactly what you want to say in your language, but something about the English version feels stiff. We're going to rebuild the way English flows through your mind, the rhythm, the texture, the natural ease of someone who doesn't just speak English, but thinks in it. If your goal is to sound confident, natural, and genuinely fluent in advanced English, not just correct, but real, this channel is built for you. Stay with me until the end today, because the second half of this session is where everything accelerates. Now, let's begin. There's a very specific feeling that separates C1 speakers from C2 speakers, and it has nothing to do with vocabulary size. It has nothing to do with how many grammar rules you know. It has everything to do with something far more subtle and far more powerful. It's the feeling of flow. When a native speaker talks, or when someone who has truly internalized English talks, there's a smoothness to it. Ideas connect naturally. One sentence leads to the next without a seam. There's a rhythm, almost like music, where the stress falls in the right places, where pauses happen for meaning rather than confusion, where the speaker sounds like they're thinking and speaking at the same time, not reciting, not performing, just expressing. That is what we're going to practice today. And here is the key insight I want you to hold on to from the very beginning. Sounding robotic in English is not a knowledge problem. It is a processing problem. You likely know more English than you think. What happens is this: when you speak, your brain runs a small internal program. It checks grammar, searches for vocabulary, constructs a sentence, translates the meaning from your native language, and then delivers the output. All of that takes time. And that small delay, that micro-hesitation, is where the robotic quality comes from. The hesitation, the slightly unnatural rhythm, the pause before words that should flow. What we're going to do today is start interrupting that program. We're going to build new pathways, natural English pathways, where whole expressions, whole ideas, whole emotional tones come to you automatically. Without the translation step, without the checking step, just directly, thought to expression. This is how fluency actually works at the highest level. So settle in, find a comfortable position. You're going to listen deeply today. You're going to repeat, you're going to shadow. And by the time we reach the final section of this practice, I want you to feel something different in your English. Something lighter, something more natural, something that belongs to you. Let's start where robotic English always starts, with sentences that are technically correct but emotionally empty. Think about a sentence like this: I think this is a good idea. Correct, clear, but flat. Now listen to how a fluent speaker might say the same thing in different contexts. Honestly, I think this could really work. You know, I was skeptical at first, but I'm coming around to this idea. This is actually more interesting than I expected. I have to say, this is pretty compelling. Same core meaning, but look at the difference. Each version carries personality. It carries texture. It carries the speaker's actual relationship to the idea. That relationship between the speaker and what they're saying is what makes language sound human rather than robotic. And learning to express that relationship is one of the most important skills you can develop at the C1, C2 level. Say this with me now, slowly and with intention. Honestly, I think this could really work. Say it again, and this time, Feel where the stress naturally falls. Honestly, I think this could really work. The word really carries weight. The word honestly signals your genuine position. This is not grammar. This is you speaking English as yourself, not as a language student. One more time. Honestly, I think this could really work. Good. Hold on to that feeling, because that's what we're building today. Now I want to talk about something that many advanced learners overlook, and it's one of the most common reasons people still sound robotic even after years of study. It's the misuse of filler language. Every fluent speaker uses filler language. Small sounds, phrases, and transitions that give the mind a fraction of a second to catch up. In your native language, you do this automatically without thinking. But in English, many learners either avoid fillers entirely, which creates unnatural, clipped speech, or they overuse one filler, which creates its own robotic quality. You may have noticed this in yourself. Maybe you say like too much. Maybe every pause becomes Maybe you say you know in a way that feels borrowed rather than natural. At the C1 to C2 level, you need a full repertoire of natural connective language. Language that buys your mind a moment while sounding entirely smooth to the listener. Let's build that repertoire now. Listen carefully and repeat each phrase with the tone and rhythm I use. Don't rush. Let the language land before you move on. To be honest with you, say it. To be honest with you, good. This phrase signals that what follows is your genuine opinion. It creates intimacy and authenticity. That's an interesting point. Let me think about that for a moment. Repeat. That's an interesting point. Let me think about that for a moment. This is golden in professional settings. It buys you thinking time while sounding thoughtful and engaged. What I find particularly interesting is, repeat. What I find particularly interesting is, notice how this phrase makes everything that follows sound considered and intelligent. I'd say that, repeat. I'd say that, confident. This signals opinion without sounding uncertain. There's something to be said for, repeat. There's something to be said for. This is a beautifully nuanced phrase. It acknowledges value in an idea, even when you're about to complicate or challenge it. It depends on how you look at it. Say that with me. It depends on how you look at it. This is how advanced speakers handle complex questions, not with a flat answer, but with a phrase that acknowledges nuance before diving deeper. And one of my personal favorites, I suppose what I'm really trying to say is, this phrase is extraordinary. It sounds completely natural. It signals self-reflection, and it gives you a full beat to organize your next thought. Say it. I suppose what I'm really trying to say is, these phrases are not decorations. They are the connective tissue of natural English speech. And when you learn to use them, not mechanically, but with genuine intention, your English immediately sounds more real, more inhabited, more like a person is speaking rather than a program running. Let's bring some of these into a small scene. Imagine you're in a workplace meeting. Your manager has just proposed a new strategy. She looks at you and says, "What's your take on this?" Now, in the past, with robotic English, you might have said something like, "I think the strategy is good, but maybe there are some problems." That's correct English, but it sounds thin. It sounds like you processed the question and delivered an output. Now listen to a C1, C2 response. To be honest with you, I think the overall direction is strong. There's definitely something to be said for taking this approach. That said, I'd want us to think carefully about timing. The way I see it, we might need a little more preparation before we roll this out fully. But overall, yes, I'm on board. Hear the difference. Same message, but now it has weight. It has personality. It has the texture of someone who is genuinely engaged with the question. It sounds like a professional with a real opinion, not a student answering correctly. Let's practice a few key phrases from that response. The way I see it. Repeat. The way I see it. There's definitely something to be said for this approach. Repeat. There's definitely something to be said for this approach. That said, I'd want us to think carefully about. Repeat. That said, I'd want us to think carefully about. I'm on board. Repeat. I'm on board. Simple but powerful. This is native level confirmation. Now say it all once more, smoothly. To be honest with you, I think the overall direction is strong. There's definitely something to be said for taking this approach. That said, I'd want us to think carefully about timing. But overall, yes, I'm on board. Beautiful. That is C2 fluency in a professional setting. Not because the vocabulary is complicated, but because the expression is natural, confident, and genuinely human. If you're still practicing with me right now, good. You should be. This is the kind of work that actually changes your English. Not passive watching, active engagement. Type "I'm serious" in the comments if you're fully in this session today. This community is full of people exactly like you. Serious learners who have decided that robotic English is no longer acceptable for the life they're building. Let's go deeper now. One of the most fascinating differences between intermediate English and advanced English is what linguists call hedging. Hedging is the art of expressing ideas with appropriate certainty. Not too absolute, not too vague, just precisely as certain as the idea deserves. Robotic English tends to be too absolute. It says, this is correct, that is wrong. This will work. Natural advanced English hedges. It says, this seems to be the most effective approach. I'm not entirely convinced that's the right direction. This could work really well if we approach it carefully. I'd be a little cautious about that. Hedging does something important. It makes you sound intelligent rather than certain. And in academic, professional, and social English, sounding intelligent is almost always more powerful than sounding certain. Let's build your hedging vocabulary right now. Phrases of slight doubt. Repeat each one. I'm not entirely sure, but. I may be wrong, but it seems to me that. There's a part of me that wonders whether. I'm not completely convinced that. It's possible that I'm missing something here, but. Phrases of measured confidence. Repeat. I think it's fairly safe to say that. From what I can tell, if I had to guess, I'd say, as far as I understand it. Phrases of gentle disagreement. Repeat. I see your point, though I'd look at it slightly differently. That's a fair perspective. I suppose I'd push back gently on that. I'm not sure I'd go quite that far. I take your point, but I wonder if. That's one way to look at it, yes. This last set, phrases of gentle disagreement, these are the marks of a truly sophisticated speaker. Because in English, professional, and social culture, the ability to disagree without damaging the conversation is extraordinarily valuable. And it requires precision in language that most non-native speakers never develop. Say this one carefully with me. I take your point, but I wonder if. Feel the movement of it. I take your point. That's genuine acknowledgement. But I wonder if. That's an opening, not an attack. It's disagreement wrapped in curiosity. That combination is incredibly powerful. Repeat it once more. I take your point, but I wonder if. Good. Sit with that. Now let's shift into something that I think is going to surprise some of you. Because we're going to talk about silence. Most language learners, especially serious, driven ones, are uncomfortable with silence. If there's a pause in their speech, They feel it as failure. They feel it says, I don't know the words. So they rush. They fill the silence with sounds or repeated phrases. They speak faster than their English can naturally support. And the result is robotic, rushed, anxious, the opposite of fluent. Here's the truth about silence in advanced English. A confident pause is one of the most powerful tools in your repertoire. When a native speaker pauses, when they slow down before an important idea, the listener leans in. The pause says, what comes next matters. The pause creates weight. It creates presence. It says, I am in control of this conversation. And here's the beautiful thing. A thoughtful pause sounds completely different from a confused pause. The difference is what comes before and after it. A confused pause sounds like this. So the strategy is, well, I think, we should. There's hesitation at the beginning and no clear landing. A confident pause sounds like this. The thing is, pause. If we don't address this now, we're going to face a much larger problem later. The pause was deliberate. It created anticipation, and the sentence that followed justified the wait. Let's practice confident pausing right now. Say this with me and take a real pause where I indicate. The truth is, pause. This is harder than most people admit. Again, what I've realized is, pause. The problem isn't lack of knowledge, it's lack of practice. One more. If I'm honest, pause. I think we could have handled that better. Feel how the pause adds authority. It doesn't betray uncertainty. It signals that you're choosing your words, which is actually a sign of respect for the listener. It says, I want to say this precisely. That is C2 English. That is what we're building. We are going to continue practicing now, and I want to shift into one of the areas I hear learners struggle with most often. Real-time conversation management. Because there's a significant difference between performing English, which is what many learners do when they're prepared, and navigating English, which is what happens when a conversation goes somewhere unexpected. Imagine you're in an interview. Everything has been going well, and then the interviewer asks something you genuinely didn't prepare for. In your mind, a quiet alarm goes off. In robotic English, what happens next is visible on your face. The pause stretches, the eyes move, the words come out haltingly. What we need is a set of conversation management phrases that buy you time, that make you sound calm and collected while your mind catches up. These are sometimes called stalling phrases, but I prefer to think of them as composure phrases. Because used well, they don't stall a conversation, they elevate it. They make you sound thoughtful rather than unprepared. Let's practice them now. Repeat each one clearly. That's a really interesting question. Let me think about that for a second. Repeat. That's a really interesting question. Let me think about that for a second. I want to give you a proper answer, so let me collect my thoughts. Repeat. I want to give you a proper answer, so let me collect my thoughts. That's something I feel quite strongly about, actually. Repeat. That's something I feel quite strongly about, actually. Notice this one. It signals engagement without committing to a position yet. You're buying time while also showing genuine investment. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Off the top of my head, I'd say, that touches on something I find genuinely fascinating. How do you typically handle situations where you disagree with your manager's decision? That's something I've actually thought about quite a bit, because I think it's one of the more nuanced challenges in any professional environment. Off the top of my head, I'd say my approach tends to involve first making sure I fully understand their reasoning. Sometimes What looks like a disagreement dissolves when you have all the information. But if I still see it differently, I'd want to have that conversation directly and professionally. I'd say something like, I take your point, though I'd like to share a different perspective, if that's all right. And then trust the process from there. Now repeat that closing phrase with me. I take your point, though I'd like to share a different perspective, if that's all right. That sentence is remarkable in its sophistication. It acknowledges, it respects authority, it asserts itself, and it does all three simultaneously. That is C2 communication. Repeat it once more. I take your point, though I'd like to share a different perspective, if that's all right. I want to spend some time now on something that is deeply connected to the robotic quality in English, and it's something almost no language course addresses directly. It's the question of emotional register. Every piece of English you produce carries an emotional register. Formal, informal, warm, professional, distant, urgent, reflective, playful, these are registers. And the robotic quality in speech often comes not from wrong words, but from mismatched registers. Imagine someone saying, I am experiencing significant levels of professional satisfaction in my current role, to a colleague at lunch. The words are correct, but the register is completely wrong for the situation. It sounds like a performance review, not a human being. It sounds robotic because the emotional temperature is cold where it should be warm. And the reverse is also true. Imagine someone saying, oh wow, it's just like so amazing, in a formal boardroom presentation. But the register is too informal for the context. It sounds unpolished, uncertain, out of place. Mastery at the C1, C2 level means reading the emotional temperature of a situation and matching your language to it, precisely and naturally. Let's practice this skill. I'm going to give you a context, and then I want you to listen to several possible responses and feel which register fits. Context: a close friend just told you they didn't get the job they really wanted. Option 1. I understand you are experiencing disappointment. Correct, but cold. Too clinical for a friend. Option 2. Oh no, I'm so sorry. That's really rough. I know how much you wanted this. Warm, direct, human. This is the right register. Option 3. Well, statistically, job rejection is quite common and shouldn't be seen as a reflection of your capabilities. Technically true. Emotionally disastrous. Completely wrong register. That third option, that is robotic English. Technically correct, emotionally tone deaf. And in real human relationships, in real professional environments, emotional tone deafness is a significant obstacle. So let's build your emotional register vocabulary in both directions, formal and warm. Formal expressions of empathy for professional environments. I appreciate you sharing that. It sounds like a challenging situation. Repeat. I appreciate you sharing that. It sounds like a challenging situation. I can see why that would be concerning. Repeat. I can see why that would be concerning. I understand that's not what you were hoping for. Repeat. I understand that's not what you were hoping for. That must have been a difficult conversation. Repeat. That must have been a difficult conversation. Now warm expressions of empathy for closer relationships. That sounds really tough. I'm sorry you're going through this. Repeat. That sounds really tough. I'm sorry you're going through this. I know that wasn't easy. How are you holding up? I completely understand. I'd feel exactly the same way. You know what? I really believe you're going to come out of this stronger. You know what? I really believe you're going to come out of this stronger. That last phrase, sit with it. You know what? That opener signals warmth and sincerity. I really believe that's not performance. That's genuine investment. You're going to come out of this stronger. That's encouragement that respects the person's difficulty rather than minimizing it. That combination, warmth, respect for difficulty, and genuine forward belief, is an advanced social and emotional skill, and it requires language to deliver it. Let me tell you something that I think is genuinely true about the learners who reach C2 fluency, the ones who stop sounding robotic and start sounding genuinely fluent. It's not the ones who study the hardest. It's the ones who practice the most naturally. There's a difference. Studying hard means reviewing vocabulary lists, doing grammar exercises, analyzing sentences. That builds knowledge. Practicing naturally means using English the way humans actually use it, with feeling, with context, with social intention. That builds fluency. And the practice that bridges knowledge and fluency, the practice that actually rewires how your brain processes English, is exactly what we're doing right now. Listening to natural, extended, contextually rich English. Repeating it, shadowing it, letting it settle into your language instinct. If this is the kind of English learning you've been searching for, not textbook, not childish, not robotic, subscribe to this channel. Because every session here is designed for exactly this. Serious learners, advanced goals, genuine fluency. Not someday, now. Let's continue. We've talked about filler language. We've talked about hedging. We've talked about silence. We've talked about register. Now I want to address something that is at the very heart of why English can sound robotic, and that is sentence variety. Many learners, even at C1 level, tend to construct sentences in the same basic architecture: subject, verb, object, statement, statement, statement. And while each sentence may be correct, the repetition of structure creates a monotony, a flatness, a kind of rhythmic predictability that signals non-native speech. Advanced English varies its sentence structure the way music varies its rhythm. Sometimes short and punchy, sometimes a longer flowing sentence that builds to a conclusion before returning to something quiet. Sometimes a question, sometimes an observation that seems to go one direction and then turns. Listen to this paragraph and feel the rhythm. Language is fascinating, not because it lets us talk, but because it lets us think. The way we express an idea shapes the idea itself. And when you change your language, when you find a new way to say something, you actually find a new way to see it. That's not metaphor, that's neuroscience. Feel it? Short, medium, long, turn, punch. That variety is what makes language alive. Now let's practice sentence variety in the context of giving an opinion on a complex topic. The impact of working from home on professional development. Monotone version. Working from home is convenient. It saves time. Some people work better at home. But it can be lonely. It can also be difficult to focus. Correct, but flat. Robotic. Now listen to the varied version. Working from home has obvious advantages. No commute, more autonomy, fewer interruptions. But I think we're still figuring out the costs. Professionally, there's something about physical presence that's hard to replicate. The informal conversations, the accidental collisions of ideas, the sense of shared purpose that comes from being in a room together. I'm not saying remote work doesn't work. Clearly it does, for many people. But I do wonder whether something subtle is lost. Whether the edges of professional development, the mentorship, the modeling, the casual learning, whether those are harder to sustain when everyone is behind a screen. That is C2 English. Let's break down what made it natural. First, it acknowledged the obvious position before moving to the nuanced one. Working from home has obvious advantages. No commute, more autonomy, fewer interruptions. That's not argument. That's honesty. And honesty sounds intelligent. Second, it used a sequence of short, evocative phrases to paint a picture. The informal conversations, the accidental collisions of ideas, the sense of shared purpose that comes from being in a room together. Each phrase is short. They accumulate. The effect is vivid. Third, it used hedging to maintain intellectual honesty. I'm not saying remote work doesn't work. I do wonder whether this signals sophistication, not certainty, but considered opinion. Let's practice the key phrases from that response right now. There are obvious advantages, but I think we're still figuring out the costs. Repeat. There's something about that's hard to replicate. Repeat. There's something about physical presence that's hard to replicate. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I do wonder whether. Repeat. Something subtle is lost. Repeat. Something subtle is lost. Simple, powerful, evocative. This is the kind of phrase that makes people think, that makes them remember the speaker. Say that one more time. Something subtle is lost. Yes, that is real English. That is the language of thoughtful, educated, confident speakers. Let's keep building your repertoire. Now I want to work on something that many C1 learners feel insecure about, and that is talking about abstract ideas. Because abstract thinking in English requires a specific kind of language, and without it, even intelligent people with complex thoughts can sound vague or worse, simplistic. Let's take a big abstract concept, the relationship between confidence and competence. A less developed response might sound like this. Confidence is important. When you are confident, you do better. And when you do better, you become more confident. They are connected. That's not wrong, but it's thin. It doesn't go anywhere interesting. Now listen to the developed version. What I find interesting about confidence is that it doesn't always follow competence. Sometimes it has to precede it. There are moments when you have to perform as though you're capable before the capability fully arrives. And that's uncomfortable, because it feels like bluffing. But in reality, it's something closer to the process of becoming. You act with the confidence you want, and gradually, through the act itself, the competence builds to meet it. It's almost as if confidence creates the conditions for competence to develop, rather than simply reflecting competence that's already there. That's the same topic, but look at how much further it goes, how much more specific, how much more interesting. Let's pull out the key advanced moves from that paragraph. What I find interesting about confidence is that it doesn't always follow competence. There are moments when you have to perform as though you're capable before the capability fully arrives. It's almost as if confidence creates the conditions for competence to develop, rather than simply reflecting competence that's already there. These phrases, what I find interesting about, there are moments when, it's almost as if, rather than simply, these are the vehicles of abstract thought in English. They allow you to take an idea somewhere. They signal intellectual movement, not just statement, but exploration. And that quality, the sense that language is exploring rather than reporting, is one of the most powerful markers of genuine C2 fluency. Tell me, which phrase from this section resonates most with you? Leave it in the comments. Because the act of noticing what moves you in language is itself a form of advanced learning. It means your instinct is developing. It means English is starting to feel, not just function. Let's move now into one of the most practically important areas of advanced English, and one where robotic speech is most damaging: storytelling. Human beings are wired for story. Before we had writing, before we had cities, we had story. And in every professional environment, in every social context, in every relationship, the ability to tell a compelling story is a mark of intelligence, of connection, and of confidence. But most English learners tell stories badly. not because they don't know the words, but because they tell events rather than stories. There is a difference. Telling events sounds like this. I had an interview last week. I was nervous. The interviewer asked me a hard question. I didn't know the answer. It was embarrassing. That's a sequence of facts, technically clear, but no one wants to listen to it. There's no arc, no tension, no personality. Telling a story sounds like this. I had an interview last week, and honestly, it started well. I felt prepared, I was confident, the conversation was flowing. And then, about 20 minutes in, the interviewer asked me something completely unexpected. I remember the exact moment. My mind just went quiet, and I had two choices in that second: panic and fill the silence badly, or buy myself a moment and come back strong. I chose the second, and it turned out to be one of the better moments of the interview. Because what I said, once I'd gathered my thoughts, felt more genuine than anything I'd prepared. Same events, completely different experience for the listener. What made the difference? Several things. First, the speaker positioned us in time and emotion immediately. Honestly, it started well. I felt prepared, I was confident, the conversation was flowing. We're inside the experience before the problem arrives. Second, the tension was built carefully. And then, about 20 minutes in, the word then is tiny but powerful. It signals a turn. The listener leans forward. Third, the inner experience was shared. I remember the exact moment. My mind just went quiet. That micro detail, my mind just went quiet, is what makes the story human. It's specific, it's honest. Fourth, the resolution was meaningful rather than just conclusive. What I said, once I gathered my thoughts, felt more genuine than anything I'd prepared. That's not just it worked out. It's a lesson, a realization, something the speaker actually understood from the experience. That is how stories create connection, and that is how you stop sounding robotic, by sounding like someone with a genuine interior life. Let's practice storytelling language right now, opening a story with context and energy. Repeat these. I was in a situation recently, and I think you'll find this interesting. Repeat. Something happened to me last year that genuinely changed how I think about. Repeat. Something happened to me last year that genuinely changed how I think about. I'll never forget this moment because it taught me something I wasn't expecting to learn. Repeat. Building tension in a story. And then, right when I thought things were settled, I remember the exact moment when I realized something was off. What happened next was something I absolutely did not see coming. My first instinct was there was a moment where I had to make a decision. I felt this very specific kind of calm, which surprised me. I felt this very specific kind of calm, which surprised me. And the thing I walked away with was, looking back, what strikes me most is, I think what it really came down to was, these phrases, combined, give you the architecture of a compelling story in English. Practice building your own stories using these openings, these tensions, these inner moments, and these landings. Because storytelling is not just social entertainment. In professional environments, in leadership, in interviews, in presentations, storytelling is one of the highest value skills you can develop. Let's rest the storytelling skill for now and shift into something different, but equally important. Let's talk about how advanced English handles disagreement. This is one of the areas where non-native speakers sometimes struggle most, not because they don't understand the language of disagreement, but because in many cultures, direct disagreement can feel rude or confrontational. And so learners either avoid disagreement entirely, which makes them seem passive, or they disagree too bluntly, which can seem aggressive or unpolished. Advanced English has an entire vocabulary for calibrated disagreement. Disagreement that is firm without being hostile. Assertive without being confrontational. Clear without being damaging. Let's build that vocabulary now. Softening before disagreeing. Repeat. I see where you're coming from, though I'd offer a slightly different perspective. Repeat. That's a reasonable position. I think where I'd push back gently is. Repeat. I don't entirely disagree with that, but I'd add a significant caveat. Repeat. I think you're onto something. I just wonder if the full picture is a bit more complicated. Repeat. Disagreeing directly but respectfully. Repeat. With respect, I don't think that's quite right. Repeat. I'd actually challenge that assumption, because from what I've seen. Repeat. I'm going to have to respectfully disagree on this one. Repeat. I hear you, but I think we're looking at this differently. Repeat. Holding your position under pressure. I appreciate your perspective, though I do still think. I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to sit with it, but my position remains. That's a fair challenge. I just don't find it compelling enough to change my view. I've thought about this quite carefully, and I'm confident in where I stand. That last group, holding your position under pressure, this is C2 English in its most powerful form, because anyone can agree, anyone can argue, but the ability to maintain a position calmly, respectfully, and with clear reasoning, that is the language of genuine authority. I've thought about this quite carefully, and I'm confident in where I stand. Feel the steadiness of it. No apology, no aggression, just calm, confident certainty. That is the voice you're building. We are now entering the second half of our session, and this is where the practice intensifies, where the rhythm builds, where the fluency we've been developing starts to feel automatic. Stay with me, because this is where the shift happens. I want to address something that is very personal for many of the learners who come to this channel, and it is this. You know English deeply. You've studied it for years. You read it fluently. You understand films, podcasts, professional documents. And yet, in the moment of speaking, something happens. A kind of fog, a hesitation, a feeling that the words that live so clearly in your mind become harder to access the moment you open your mouth. This experience has a name. Language psychologists sometimes call it production anxiety, but I prefer to think of it simply as the gap between passive knowledge and active fluency. Passive knowledge is what you have when you understand English. Active fluency is what you have when English flows from you. And the gap between them is closed, not by more studying, but by producing. By practicing the output, not just the input. That's what today is. Every time you've repeated a phrase in this session, every time you've said, to be honest with you, or I take your point, or there's something to be said for, you've been moving passive knowledge toward active fluency. You've been firing pathways in your brain that will become faster and more automatic with every repetition. This is how language actually works, not through memorization, through use. And I want you to internalize something important before we continue. You are not behind. You are not failing. If you felt frustrated, if you felt that gap between your intelligence and your ability to express it in English, that frustration is actually a sign of high awareness. It means you know how good your English can be. You're just not there yet. Let's continue building. Now let's focus on advanced vocabulary, but in a very specific way. Because the goal is not to learn impressive words in isolation. The goal is to learn words in the patterns and collocations where they naturally live. A common mistake at C1 level is using advanced vocabulary incorrectly, using the right word but in the wrong company. For example, you might know the word profound, but do you know which nouns it naturally lives with? a profound understanding, a profound impact, a profound sense of loss, profound implications, profound respect. You'd rarely say a profound day, even though it's not technically wrong. The word simply doesn't live there in natural English. This is called collocation, and it is one of the most important, least taught aspects of truly natural advanced English. Let's practice collocations now. I'll give you the adjective or verb, and you'll hear the nouns it naturally accompanies. Repeat each grouping. Raise. Raise a concern, raise a question, raise an objection, raise awareness, raise the stakes. Raise a concern. Raise a question. Raise an objection. Raise awareness. Raise the stakes. Deep. A deep understanding. Deep concern. Deep admiration. Deep frustration. Deep satisfaction. Repeat. A deep understanding. Deep concern. Deep admiration. Deep frustration. Deep satisfaction. Significant. A significant challenge, significant progress, significant impact, significant implications, significant shift. Repeat. A significant challenge, significant progress, significant impact, significant implications, significant shift. Considerable. Considerable effort, considerable experience, considerable doubt, considerable attention, considerable resistance. Repeat. Considerable effort, considerable experience, considerable doubt, considerable attention, considerable resistance. Address. Address a concern, address the issue, address the audience, address the problem, address the question. Repeat. Address a concern, address the issue, address the problem, address the question. Pose. Pose a challenge, pose a question, pose a risk, pose a threat, pose a problem. Repeat. Pose a challenge, pose a question, pose a risk, pose a threat. Now, let's use these collocations in real sentences. Listen and repeat. This proposal raises a significant concern that I think we need to address before moving forward. Repeat. I have considerable experience in this area, which is why I feel confident sharing my perspective. Repeat. The changes you're proposing pose a real risk if we don't plan for the implications carefully. Repeat. I have deep admiration for the work this team has done, and equally deep concern about the direction we're heading. Repeat. Feel how the language sits together. Deep admiration and deep concern. The parallel structure, the precise collocation, that is what makes speech sound educated and natural simultaneously. One more for fluency. There are significant implications here that we haven't fully addressed, and I think it's worth raising the question before we commit to anything. That sentence, natural, structured, hedged, professional, that is the daily English of an advanced communicator. And you just said it. Let's continue. Now I want to work on something that I think is one of the most underrated skills at C1 to C2 level, and that is the ability to talk about ideas rather than just facts. Because facts are easy to report. Ideas require language. Think about the difference between these two responses to the question. What do you think about the future of work? Fact-based response. Many jobs will be automated. Companies are using AI. Remote work is becoming more common. Salaries are changing. Idea-based response. What I find fascinating about this moment is that we're essentially renegotiating the relationship between human beings and work. What it means, what it's worth, what it demands from us. Automation is accelerating that renegotiation, but I don't think the outcome is predetermined. It depends heavily on choices, individual, organizational, political. The question I keep coming back to is, as machines take over more of what we do, what are we going to become? What does human contribution look like in a world where many tasks can be optimized out of existence? That is idea-based English. And the language that enables it, let me pull it out for you. What I find fascinating about this moment is that, repeat, this opener positions you as someone with an active, engaged perspective, not just a reporter of facts. We're essentially renegotiating, repeat, we're essentially renegotiating the relationship between. The word essentially is brilliant here. It's a hedge that makes abstract claims feel grounded. Essentially says, I know this is a simplification, but this is the simplification that captures the truth. I don't think the outcome is predetermined. Repeat. This signals independent thinking. You're not just describing what's happening. You're challenging the assumption that it's inevitable. The question I keep coming back to is, repeat. The question I keep coming back to is, this is one of the most intellectually signaling phrases in the English language. It says, I've been thinking about this over time. I return to it. It matters to me. That depth of engagement is what distinguishes a truly fluent speaker from someone who is merely technically correct. Say it once more. The question I keep coming back to is, yes, use that. Own it. Let's now move into something that I promised you in the beginning. The part where everything accelerates, where you feel the fluency building in real time, where the rhythm becomes natural rather than constructed. I'm going to build a continuous spoken sequence. Your job is to shadow me, to stay with me, to repeat each phrase as it comes. Don't slow down to think. Let the language carry you. This is the practice that actually changes your neural pathways. Ready? Let's go. To be honest with you, this has been on my mind for a while. Shadow me. To be honest with you, this has been on my mind for a while. I'm not entirely sure I have the full picture, but from what I can tell, shadow. I'm not entirely sure I have the full picture, but from what I can tell, the way I see it, we're dealing with something more complex than it appears. Shadow. The way I see it, we're dealing with something more complex than it appears. That said, I do think there are reasons to be genuinely optimistic. Shadow. That said, I do think there are reasons to be genuinely optimistic. There's something to be said for taking a longer view of this. Shadow. I'd push back gently on the idea that the situation is as simple as that. Shadow. What strikes me most is how quickly things can shift when you change the frame. I find it genuinely interesting, the gap between what we say and what we mean. Shadow. If I'm being completely honest, I think the problem runs a lot deeper. Shadow. I've thought about this quite a bit, and my sense is that there's a part of me that wonders whether we're asking the right questions. Shadow. The thing that often gets overlooked is, shadow. The thing that often gets overlooked is, at the end of the day, and I know that phrase is overused, but genuinely what matters most is, shadow. I suppose what I'm really trying to say is, this requires more nuance than most people are willing to bring to it. Shadow. Speaking confidently is not about having all the answers. Shadow. It's about being at ease with your thoughts, even as you're still finding them. It's about letting the language work for you instead of working against it. And that ease, that naturalness, is built exactly like this. Shadow. One phrase at a time, one session at a time, day after day. Shadow. Until English stops being something you perform and becomes something you live. Shadow. Until English stops being something you perform and becomes something you live. Yes, that is the destination. Let's continue with our vocabulary work, but now at a more advanced level. Because we've been building phrases and structures, now let's build the kind of abstract vocabulary that gives your language texture. The adjectives, the verbs, the nouns that separate sophisticated speakers from average ones. Listen to each word and its family of meanings. Then repeat it in a sentence. Nuanced. Something is nuanced when it has multiple layers of meaning that a simple view would miss. Her response was remarkably nuanced. She acknowledged the complexity without falling into either extreme. Repeat. Her response was remarkably nuanced. Compelling. Something is compelling when it makes you pay attention, when the force of its logic or its emotion is hard to resist. He made a compelling case for reconsidering our approach. Repeat. Subtle. Something is subtle when it's real but not obvious. There's a subtle difference between confidence and arrogance, and the best communicators understand exactly where that line is. Repeat. There's a subtle difference between confidence and arrogance. Pervasive. Something is pervasive when it's present everywhere, when it's woven through a situation in a way that's hard to separate. The assumption that speed equals intelligence is pervasive in professional cultures, and it's often wrong. Repeat. Calibrated. Something is calibrated when it's been carefully adjusted to fit a precise situation. The best leaders give calibrated responses, not reactions. Repeat. Calibrated responses, not reactions. Tenuous. Something is tenuous when it's thin, fragile, or barely holding together. The connection between their argument and the evidence is at best tenuous. Repeat. Underpin. To underpin something is to provide the foundation that holds it up. A shared vocabulary underpins every effective team. Repeat. A shared vocabulary underpins every effective team. Articulate. As an adjective, someone is articulate when they express complex ideas clearly and precisely. As a verb, to articulate something means to express it clearly. She was remarkably articulate in her explanation of a genuinely complicated subject. Repeat. Relentless. Something is relentless when it continues without stopping or weakening, often used about effort, pressure, or commitment. The most fluent speakers got there through relentless practice, not talent. Repeat. The most fluent speakers got there through relentless practice. Now let's put several of these together in a passage. What strikes me about truly articulate speakers is that their language is always calibrated, nuanced without being vague, compelling without being dramatic. There's something subtle in the way they handle complexity, not by simplifying it, but by finding the precise words that make the complexity feel manageable. That skill is built through relentless, consistent practice, and it underpins everything, every meeting, every conversation, every relationship where English is the medium through which you express who you are. And it underpins everything. Yes, let's keep building, because we're not done yet. And I want to make sure that when you leave this session, when you close this video, you leave with something real, something that has genuinely shifted in your English. Let's talk now about one of the most interesting and most overlooked aspects of advanced fluency, the language of speculation and imagination. Because at C2 level, you don't just talk about what is, you talk about what could be, what might have been, what would happen if. This requires a whole vocabulary of conditional and speculative expression, and it's where many C1 learners hit a ceiling. Let's start with the language of imagining alternative scenarios. What if we approach this completely differently? Repeat. What if we approach this completely differently? I sometimes wonder what would have happened if. Repeat. Imagine for a moment that there were no constraints. What would that look like? If I had to start from scratch, I'd probably... Repeat. In an ideal world? Repeat. In an ideal world, we'd have more time to prepare. But given the reality we're working with, had we known earlier, we might have. Repeat. Had we known earlier, we might have taken a different approach entirely. That last construction, had we known earlier, this is an advanced conditional form, and it's one that many learners avoid because they're not sure of it. But once you own it, it sounds extraordinarily natural and sophisticated. It means the same as if we had known earlier, but with a slightly more formal, elegant sound. Let's practice a few more of these inverted conditionals. Had I realized sooner, I would have. Repeat. Had I realized sooner, I would have handled it differently. Were this to happen again, I think I'd. Repeat. Were this to happen again, I think I'd respond more calmly. Should you need anything further, please don't hesitate to. Should you need anything further, please don't hesitate to reach out. These conditional inversions are markers of genuinely advanced English. They appear in professional writing, in formal speech, in the language of confident, educated speakers. And using them, even occasionally, signals a high level of command. Let's now practice the language of speculation about the present and future. It seems to me that, repeat, my instinct would be that. I suspect the real issue is, repeat. If I had to speculate, I'd say, repeat, there's a possibility, and this is just my read of the situation, that, repeat. I imagine the challenge will be, repeat. My sense is that this is going to require, repeat. These phrases allow you to engage with ideas that are not yet resolved, which is most of real life, most of professional work, most of real conversation. The ability to speculate clearly, thoughtfully, and with appropriate uncertainty is not weakness, it is precision. It is intellectual honesty, and it is one of the clearest markers of genuine advanced fluency. Let's now build an extended speculative paragraph. Shadow me at your natural pace. My sense is that the biggest challenge ahead isn't going to be technical. It's going to be human. How we coordinate, how we communicate under pressure, how we maintain trust when things get complicated. If I had to speculate, I'd say the organizations that navigate this best will be the ones that invest in precisely those skills: communication, clarity, the ability to have difficult conversations without losing the relationship. Were I advising a team right now, that is where I'd focus the most attention. Shadow that again. Steady, confident pace. Feel the fluency of it. My sense is that the biggest challenge ahead isn't going to be technical. It's going to be human. How we coordinate. How we communicate under pressure. How we maintain trust when things get complicated. Short, parallel structure, very powerful. If I had to speculate, I'd say the organizations that navigate this best will be the ones that invest in precisely those skills. Were I advising a team right now, that is where I'd focus the most attention. Yes, that is it. That is the voice. We're approaching the final section of today's session, and I want to use this time to do something very specific. To build the confidence rhythm that I mentioned at the beginning. The section where everything flows faster, where the repetitions shorten, where the language becomes automatic. This is not relaxation time. This is performance time. This is when everything we've practiced consolidates into fluency. Stay with me. Keep repeating. Let the language carry you. I see your point, but I'd look at it a little differently. Say it now. There's more to this than meets the eye. What I find interesting is the gap between the two positions. If I'm being honest, I have some reservations. That said, I'm genuinely open to reconsidering. Let me put it another way. Here's what I think is really going on. It's a compelling argument, though not a decisive one. My sense is that the situation is more nuanced than that. To put it simply, and I know nothing is ever simple, what strikes me most is, I've been thinking about this, and I keep coming back to, there's something important being missed here. The way I see it, the real question is, I'd push back on that, gently but firmly. To be honest, the way I see it, I'd say, that's fair. Though I wonder, what strikes me, my sense is, I keep coming back to, there's something to be said. I take your point. With respect. I find this compelling. I'm not entirely convinced. That said, on reflection, all things considered, in the end, these are not just phrases. These are the connective tissue of advanced English conversation. Each one carries tone, carries relationship to an idea, carries personality. And when they live in you, when they come automatically, your English sounds inhabited. It sounds real. It sounds like you. One more time, all together, in natural sequence. Shadow me as though this is a real conversation you're having, as though these thoughts are yours, because they are. To be honest with you, I've been thinking about this for a while, and my sense is that we're looking at something more nuanced than it first appears. The way I see it, there are really two distinct questions here, and we've been treating them as one. That said, I take your point about timing. I'm not entirely convinced it's the right moment, but I'm genuinely open to reconsidering if the evidence shifts. What strikes me most is the gap between what we intend and what actually lands, and that gap, I think, is worth taking seriously. In the end, all things considered, I think the most honest answer is we don't know yet. And rather than pretend we do, I'd rather stay open and stay curious. That feels more useful right now. Shadow that one more time. Own it. To be honest with you, I've been thinking about this for a while. Yours. And my sense is that we're looking at something more nuanced than it first appears. Yours. The way I see it, there are really two distinct questions here, and we've been treating them as one. Yours. That said, I take your point. Yours. What strikes me most is the gap between what we intend and what actually lands. Yours. In the end, I'd rather stay open and stay curious. Yours. Let me tell you what I want for you. Not just better vocabulary, not just advanced grammar. I want English to feel like yours, like something that belongs to you as completely as your mother tongue, with its own personality, its own textures, its own rhythms. I want the day to come when you sit in a meeting or walk into an interview or pick up the phone in English and the language simply flows, not because you've remembered the right words, but because English has become the natural medium of your thought. That day is coming. It may not feel close, but every session like this, every hour of serious intentional practice shortens the distance. You know something about the learners who reach that level? They don't get there by being more talented than others. They get there by practicing more honestly than others, by doing the uncomfortable work of actual production, actual speaking, rather than passive consumption. By staying with sessions like this one all the way to the end, by coming back the next day and the day after that, that consistency, that relentless, patient consistency is the only secret. There is no shortcut, but here is what I can promise you. The path is clear, and you're on it. Let's close today with a final practice sequence. This one is different, because I'm not going to give you the words first. I'm going to give you a situation, and I want you to respond using everything we've practiced today. Speak out loud. Actually speak. Let yourself fumble if you need to, and then correct and continue. Because that process, fumbling, recovering, continuing, is itself a form of advanced practice. Situation 1. A colleague asks you, "What do you think is the biggest communication challenge in your field right now?" Pause, think, speak, use your phrases. To be honest with you, my sense is that what strikes me most, I keep coming back to. Take your time. Don't rush. Let the language come to you. And if it comes slowly, that's fine. Speed comes later. First comes intention. Situation 2. Someone challenges your opinion in a meeting. They say, "I think you're overcomplicating this. It's really quite straightforward." How do you respond? With what tone? With what phrases? I hear you, though I'd push back gently on that. I take your point, and I wonder if, with respect, I think there's more to this than it appears. Choose one. Speak it. Own it. Situation 3. Someone asks you to describe your English learning journey. What do you say? I've been working on my English for years, and what I've realized is that fluency isn't really about knowledge. It's about something more like inhabiting the language. Finding the places where you stop translating and start thinking directly in English. I'm still on that journey. Say that out loud, right now, your version of it, because that's a true thing, and it deserves to be said in natural, fluent, confident English. You have everything you need. Not tomorrow, now. As we reach the end of this session, I want to leave you with something simple, something worth carrying with you. The difference between someone who sounds robotic in English and someone who sounds genuinely fluent is not knowledge. It is practice. It is comfort. It is the willingness to produce, to speak, to try, to be imperfect, to keep going. It is the accumulation of exactly the kind of practice we've done today. Phrase by phrase, repetition by repetition, scene by scene, concept by concept. You spent real time here today. That matters. Every phrase you repeated, every moment you shadowed, every time you said a difficult expression out loud, that was investment, not in a language. And I want you to know something. The person who speaks English with confidence, with nuance, with flow, with genuine personality, that person is already inside you. The practice we do here every session is simply clearing the path to that voice. Come back tomorrow. Practice again. Keep building. Keep showing up. Because the learners who reach the level they're capable of, they're not the most talented ones. They're the most consistent ones. The ones who take this seriously. The ones who treat their English not as a school subject, but as a professional and personal identity, as a tool for the life they're building. You are that learner. I can tell, because you're still here. This is Easy English with Sage. Take care of your English, take care of yourself, and I'll be right here when you come back.